Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. Michael stood at the kitchen counter, stirring his coffee, gazing out of the window as the early morning sun bathed their suburban neighborhood in a soft golden light. Their house, a two-story, beautifully maintained home, stood as a testament to years of hard work. Everything appeared flawless. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the flower beds perfectly pruned, and inside the air smelled of fresh laundry, scented candles, and the faint aroma of breakfast. To anyone outside, Michael and his wife Sarah had it all: a beautiful home, a comfortable lifestyle, and a stable marriage that seemed untouched by the chaos of the world. But lately, something felt off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it lingered in the quiet moments between them. The love that had once filled their interactions seemed distant. There were still hugs and kisses, of course. Sarah would brush past him and smile, give him a quick peck on the cheek, or curl up next to him on the couch after a long day. But it wasn't the same. That spark of genuine connection that used to make his heart race was fading. The little glances they used to exchange during dinner felt more like hollow gestures now, as though they were actors playing parts they no longer believed in. He told himself it was just the weight of life, that maybe Sarah was stressed from her job. She'd been working longer hours, often coming home late, looking exhausted. Just a rough patch, he thought. After all, every marriage had its ups and downs. Still, when he'd try to talk to her about it, the conversations were always surface level, never touching on the deeper undercurrents of their relationship. She would smile, wave away his concerns with a laugh, and tell him not to worry so much. Last night, they'd gone to bed in silence. She'd been on her phone, scrolling through social media or texting, while Michael stared at the ceiling, his mind swirling with unease. He couldn't remember the last time they'd had a real conversation, one that felt like they were truly connecting. As he sipped his coffee, his eyes drifted to Sarah, who was bustling around the kitchen, preparing breakfast with mechanical precision. She hummed softly to herself, seemingly carefree. Her dark hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she wore the same old t-shirt of his that she always claimed was her favorite. He loved that shirt on her, loved how it made her look effortlessly beautiful. But even that felt different now. When had she started avoiding his eyes? When did her laughter seem so detached? "Do you need anything from the store later?" she asked, not looking up from the eggs she was scrambling. "No, I think we're good," he replied, his voice laced with a faint sadness he hoped she wouldn't notice. He watched her move, graceful as ever, but there was a growing distance between them that even her presence couldn't close. "All right," she said, finally glancing his way with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And just like that, the conversation was over. Michael swallowed the knot in his throat and turned back to his coffee. Maybe he was just imagining things. Maybe he was reading too much into it. Sarah loved him. He knew that. They had a life together, shared memories, and dreams they hadn't even fulfilled yet. But every now and then, when he caught her lost in thought, or when she absentmindedly ignored his touch, a sharp pang of fear cut through him. Was he losing her? The thought was absurd. They were Michael and Sarah. They had been together for nearly a decade. They were solid. But still, the tiny moments of detachment, the way she'd brush off his attempts to talk about the future, or how she'd pull away just a little too quickly after a kiss, kept gnawing at him. "You look tired," he said, trying to mask his worry behind casual conversation. "Rough night?" Sarah glanced up, pausing for a split second before offering another one of those soft, distant smiles. "Yeah, just a lot going on at work." Michael nodded, forcing himself to believe her. He didn't want to push, didn't want to seem paranoid. She was probably telling the truth. Work could be stressful, and everyone had their moments where they needed a little space. But why did it feel like the space between them was growing larger every day? That evening after dinner, they settled onto the couch. The TV was on, but neither of them was really paying attention. Michael reached for her hand, hoping to bridge the gap, but she pulled it away gently, muttering something about needing to check her emails. He felt a sting of rejection but stayed quiet, watching her as she scrolled through her phone. Her face, illuminated by the screen's glow, was serene, but in that moment, she seemed a million miles away. When had they stopped talking? Stopped laughing about the little things, sharing their day's highs and lows? Michael couldn't remember the last time they'd just been with each other. The silence between them felt heavy, almost suffocating, and as much as he tried to shake it off, the unease settled deep in his chest. Sarah yawned and got up, leaving him sitting there alone in the dim light of the living room. "I'm going to bed," she called over her shoulder, not even waiting for him to respond. Michael watched her disappear up the stairs, his stomach twisting. Something was wrong, but whatever it was, he wasn't ready to face it yet. Daniil was a powerful thing. He turned off the TV, sat back, and let the quiet of the empty room swallow him whole. The first time Sarah came home late, Michael barely noticed. She'd mentioned that her office was overloaded with work, something about a new project, and he believed her. Why wouldn't he? They'd always trusted each other implicitly. When she tiptoed into their bedroom around midnight, apologizing for the long hours he was already half asleep, offering a muffled, "It's fine," before drifting back into unconsciousness. But then it became more frequent. Once or twice a week turned into almost every night. She'd come home later and later, her excuses flimsier with each passing day. At first, it was always work-late meetings, deadlines, networking events. Then, without warning, her reasons became vaguer. I was out with a friend, she'd say with a shrug, or I just needed some time to clear my head. The lies were small, almost imperceptible if you weren't looking too closely. But Michael was. He started noticing the little things like how she'd started checking her phone constantly, even when they were supposed to be spending time together. She used to leave it on the table or in her bag, but now it was always in her hand, always lighting up with notifications she would casually swipe away without letting him see. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, she laughed at something on her phone. Michael glanced up, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What's so funny?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Sarah quickly put the phone down, the smile fading from her face. "Oh, nothing. Just something silly from work." His gut twisted, but he forced himself to nod and move on. He didn't want to seem like the paranoid husband, but he couldn't ignore how her phone was suddenly such a constant companion. Late at night, when she thought he was asleep, he'd hear the soft buzz of messages, and the faint light from her screen would cast a glow on the ceiling. He'd open his eyes, catching her in the act, her face lit up by the glow of the phone as she smiled softly at the messages. Michael's stomach would churn, but he stayed quiet, swallowing the discomfort. It's just work, he'd tell himself. She's probably stressed. Still, the excuses started stacking up. Sarah's previously predictable schedule became erratic. "I'm heading out," she'd say on a Wednesday evening as she slipped into a dress that clung to her in ways that left Michael breathless and worried. He couldn't remember the last time she'd dressed up like that for him. "For what?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Just meeting a friend for drinks." Her response was casual, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. She stood at the front door, fixing her hair in the mirror, barely glancing back at him. "Which friend?" he asked, a little sharper than he intended. Her fingers paused briefly, but she recovered quickly. "Emma, from work. You haven't met her. Just a girls' night." Michael's brow furrowed. "Since when do you have girls' nights?" He hated how suspicious he sounded, but something inside him was screaming. Sarah turned to him, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Are you seriously going to give me the third degree every time I go out?" Her tone was defensive, her posture stiff. "No, Michael trailed off, feeling the weight of her glare. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to let it go. "I didn't mean it like that." She sighed, grabbing her bag. "I'll be home late. Don't wait up." And just like that, she was gone. Michael sat in the empty house, staring at the door long after it had closed behind her. Something gnawed at him, a deep sense of unease that wouldn't let go. But he tried to shake it off, convincing himself that he was overthinking. Maybe he was just stressed from work, or maybe they were in a rut, like all marriages go through from time to time. But as the nights dragged on, her late returns became the norm. She stopped giving him specific reasons for her absences, and when he asked, the tension between them grew. "You're being controlling," she'd snap whenever he pressed her. The word controlling stung. He'd never been that way before. But now, with every evasive answer, every brush off, he found himself more on edge, more anxious. He could feel her slipping through his fingers, and he was helpless to stop it. Their sex life, which had already been on a slow decline, nearly vanished altogether. She always had an excuse: too tired, too busy, not in the mood. It used to be spontaneous, passionate, but now there was only an awkward silence when they lay in bed. Michael would reach for her in the darkness, but she'd gently pull away, muttering, "Not tonight," before rolling over to the other side of the bed. It wasn't just the physical distance that was growing, it was everything. Their conversations became surface level, barely touching on anything real. She stopped asking about his day, stopped laughing at his jokes. They moved around each other like ghosts, only interacting when necessary, and even then, it was strained. Michael's friends started to notice too. "You all right, man?" His buddy, John, asked one evening over beers. They were at their usual spot, a small bar near their office. Michael had been quieter than usual, lost in thought. "Yeah, just tired, I guess," Michael mumbled, taking a sip of his beer. John raised an eyebrow. "You sure you look?" "I don't know. Distracted." "Everything good with you and Sarah?" Michael hesitated, feeling a wave of unease wash over him. "Yeah, we're fine. Just work stuff, you know?" John didn't look convinced, but he let it go. "All right, man. Just checking. You know you can talk to me if something's up." "Thanks," Michael said, forcing a smile. But he didn't feel like talking. Not to John, not to anyone. What could he say? That his wife, the woman he'd built his life with, was slipping away from him. That he felt like a stranger in his own home. The following week, Sarah came home well after midnight, stumbling through the front door with a giggle that made Michael's stomach drop. He was waiting for her in the living room, the dim light from a nearby lamp casting long shadows across the room. She paused when she saw him, her smile faltering for just a moment before she composed herself. "You're still up?" she asked, feigning surprise. Michael stood, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep." "Where were you?" Sarah's eyes flickered, and for a split second, he saw something panic. Guilt, before she plastered on a tired smile. "Out with Emma? We lost track of time?" Michael didn't say anything. He just stared at her, searching her face for some sign that she was telling the truth. But all he saw was the growing distance between them, and it terrified him. Sarah walked past him, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she made her way upstairs. "I'm going to bed," she called over her shoulder. Michael had always been the kind of guy who believed that things would work themselves out. Life had thrown him curveballs before, and he had faced them head-on, with patience and resilience. But this was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing Sarah, and it was slowly tearing him apart. The late nights, the secretive texts, the growing distance between them, it all weighed on him like a storm cloud he couldn't escape. His gut told him something was wrong, but he wasn't ready to confront it. Not yet. But that night, after another one of Sarah's late returns, something inside him snapped. They'd had another argument. It started like all the others. He asked her where she'd been. She brushed him off with some half-hearted excuse. Out with friends, she had said. Her words slurred slightly from what he assumed was alcohol, but it was the way she said it, the way she avoided his eyes as she kicked off her heels and headed straight for the bedroom, that left him staring after her, his heart pounding in his chest. He sat on the edge of the couch, his mind racing. There was a gnawing feeling deep in his gut, something primal and angry. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Sarah wasn't just stressed from work. She wasn't just tired or distant. Something else was going on, and for the first time, he was ready to face it. The house was quiet, almost oppressively so. He listened to the sound of the refrigerator humming, the faint creak of the floorboards upstairs where Sarah was getting ready for bed. And then, impulsively, he grabbed his keys. He didn't have a plan. He wasn't even sure what he was doing. But when Sarah had mentioned she was going out with friends tonight, there had been something off about her tone. She hadn't given any details, hadn't mentioned any specific names. Michael drove without thinking, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he navigated through the quiet streets of their neighborhood. He had a vague idea of where she might be. There was a bar downtown she used to mention in passing, a trendy spot that her co-workers frequented. His mind raced as he drove, heart pounding in his chest, thoughts spiraling out of control. Maybe she's just having drinks with a friend, he told himself, trying to calm his nerves. Maybe I'm overreacting. But the doubt was too strong to ignore. He parked his car a few blocks from the bar, careful to keep some distance. The streets were quiet, the air cool, and for a moment, he almost turned back. But as he walked toward the entrance of the bar, the gnawing feeling in his stomach intensified. He wasn't even sure what he was looking for, some sort of confirmation, something to prove that his worst fears weren't real. But as he approached the dimly lit windows of the bar, he saw her. Sarah. She was sitting at a small table near the back, laughing. But she wasn't alone. There was a man sitting across from her, his hand casually resting on her knee. Michael felt his stomach drop, his heart clenching in his chest. It was the way they were sitting together, the way she was leaning toward him, her body language relaxed and familiar, that made it impossible to deny what was happening. They were close, too close. And then it happened. The man leaned in, his hand moving up to brush a strand of hair from Sarah's face, and she smiled, a smile Michael hadn't seen in months. He felt frozen, like he was watching a scene from someone else's life, unable to look away. And then the man leaned in further, his lips finding hers in a soft, lingering kiss. The world around Michael seemed to crumble. It felt like someone had reached inside him and ripped his heart out, leaving an empty, gaping hole in its place. His chest tightened, his breathing shallow and ragged. He wanted to burst through the door, to grab the guy and demand answers, but all he could do was stand there, paralyzed by the sight of his wife, the woman he loved, the woman he had built a life with, kissing another man. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them away, refusing to break down in the middle of the street. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked back to his car, his mind in a haze. He sat behind the wheel, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. His head spun with disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. How had it come to this? How had he missed the signs? He couldn't stay there. He couldn't just sit in that parking lot, waiting for her to finish whatever the hell she was doing. So, he drove home, the silence in the car deafening. By the time he reached the house, it felt like his entire world had collapsed around him. He wasn't sure how long he sat in the driveway, staring blankly at the front door, but eventually he forced himself inside. The house felt cold, empty, like a shell of what it used to be. He went to the bedroom, but Sarah was already asleep, her phone clutched loosely in her hand. He stared at her for a long moment, wondering how the woman he loved could do this to him. His gaze shifted to her phone, and without thinking, he grabbed it, his fingers trembling slightly as he unlocked it. She hadn't even bothered to change her password. What he found on the screen shattered whatever fragile hope he had left. Text after text, message after message. Explicit conversations between her and the man he'd just seen her with. Pictures, plans, it was all there, spelled out in black and white. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Can't wait to see you again, one message read. Last night was incredible. I've never felt so alive. Michael's hands shook as he scrolled through the messages, each one a dagger to the heart. There was no denying it anymore. His wife was cheating on him. And it wasn't just a fling. There was emotion there, intimacy that she hadn't shared with him in months, maybe even years. He put the phone down, his chest heaving with silent sobs. The betrayal was suffocating, overwhelming. It wasn't just the physical act of cheating that hurt, it was the lies, the deception, The fact that she had been living this double life right under his nose while he had been doing everything he could to keep their marriage together. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Sarah's sleeping form, the woman he thought he knew. But she wasn't the same woman anymore. Or maybe she had changed long before, and he had just refused to see it. The weight of the discovery pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but instead he just sat there, numb, the enormity of the betrayal sinking in. The woman he loved had betrayed him. And now, there was no turning back. The morning light filtered through the bedroom window, casting a soft glow over the room. Michael had barely slept. His mind raced all night, cycling through waves of anger, disbelief, and heart-wrenching sadness. He had replayed the events in his head over and over again: Sarah at the bar, the kiss, the messages. It felt like a nightmare, one he couldn't wake up from. Sarah stirred beside him, stretching lazily under the covers. She looked peaceful, completely unaware of the storm brewing next to her. Michael stared at her for a long moment, bile rising in his throat. How could she lie so easily? How could she come home and sleep next to him as if nothing was wrong? The weight of his discovery bore down on him, and he couldn't hold it in any longer. The truth was out, the lies exposed, and now he was left standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to fall or fight. Sarah blinked, rubbing her eyes as she woke up. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice groggy. She stretched again, her back to him, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Michael's fists clenched under the blankets. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't pretend. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, but filled with an intensity that made her pause. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. For a split second, there was confusion in her expression, but it quickly morphed into something else: wariness. "About what?" she asked, sitting up and pulling the blanket around her, suddenly on guard. Michael felt his jaw tighten. He had rehearsed this moment in his head all night, but now that it was happening, the words felt too small, too weak for the avalanche of emotions crashing inside him. He reached over to the nightstand, grabbing her phone, the screen still illuminated with the evidence of her betrayal. Sarah's face went pale. She didn't need to ask what was on the screen. She knew. The silence that followed was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken truths. "What the hell is this?" Michael's voice shook, his hand trembling as he held up her phone, the dam of emotions threatening to burst. "Tell me, Sarah. What the hell is this?" She didn't answer at first. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she was scrambling to find the right words. But there were no right words for this. Not anymore. "Michael, I can explain." "Explain?" He cut her off, his voice rising. "You can explain? You've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, sleeping with another man, and you think you can just explain that away?" Sarah flinched at the venom in his voice. "I wasn't. It's not what you think," she stammered, her eyes wide, fear beginning to creep in. "It was a mistake. A huge mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. Don't lie to me." Michael shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of their once peaceful bedroom. He threw the phone onto the bed in front of her, the messages glaring up at her like a guilty verdict. "I saw you, Sarah. Last night, at the bar. I saw you with him. I saw you kiss him." His voice cracked with emotion, the words feeling like poison in his mouth. "Don't you dare stand there and tell me it wasn't what I think." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but Michael wasn't moved. "Not anymore. Not after everything. I swear, Michael, it didn't mean anything," she said, her voice breaking as she reached for him, desperate to bridge the gap between them. But he recoiled from her touch like it burned. "It didn't mean anything." Michael repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long, sneaking around, sending messages, meeting him, and you think you can stand there and tell me it didn't mean anything." His voice broke, and he felt tears sting his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to pretend like this was just some mistake." Sarah was crying now, her hands shaking as she tried to wipe the tears from her cheeks. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Michael. I'm so sorry." Michael laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and broken. "You didn't want to hurt me. That's a joke. You've already torn my heart out. What more could you possibly do to hurt me?" The room was thick with tension, the weight of their shattered marriage pressing down on both of them. Sarah sobbed, her face buried in her hands, but Michael couldn't feel sympathy for her. "Not now. Not after everything." "How long?" he demanded, his voice harsh and unrelenting. "How long have you been seeing him?" Sarah didn't answer at first, her sobs muffling her words. But Michael wasn't going to let it slide. He needed to know. He needed to hear the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "How long?" he repeated, louder this time. 6 months, she choked out, her voice trembling. "It's been 6 months. The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. 6 months. 6 months of lies, of deception, of pretending everything was fine while she was sneaking around behind his back. He felt like he'd been living in a dream, a cruel fantasy where everything was perfect while his wife was carrying on an affair right under his nose. He stood up, pacing the room as his thoughts spiraled out of control. He couldn't look at her, couldn't even bear to be in the same room as her. Every time he looked at her, all he saw was the betrayal, the lies, the man who had stolen her away from him. "You disgust me," he muttered, his voice low but seething with rage. Sarah flinched, her sobs growing louder. "Please, Michael, I'll do anything. I'll fix this. I swear, I'll fix it. We can go to counseling, we can work through this. I still love you." He stopped pacing, turning to face her, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and sadness. "Don't," he said, his voice hard. "Don't you dare say you love me. You don't do this to someone you love." Sarah crumpled, falling to her knees at the side of the bed, her body shaking with sobs. She looked so small, so fragile, but Michael couldn't feel pity. All he felt was the cold, empty space where his heart used to be. "I didn't want this," Sarah whispered through her tears. "I didn't want any of this." Michael's jaw clenched, his fists tight at his sides. "Well, you made your choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and now you have to live with it." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The only sound in the room was Sarah's soft, broken sobs. Michael stood there, his mind racing, the weight of everything crashing down on him. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he had built his life with, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. And now, there was nothing left. "Is he worth it?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. "Is he worth everything we built together?" Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No," she whispered. "No, he's not. It didn't mean anything. I swear, it didn't." But Michael didn't believe her. He couldn't. Not anymore. "I don't care what it meant to you," he said, his voice cold and final. "It's over, Sarah. We're done." Her sobs grew louder, but Michael didn't stay to hear them. He turned and walked out of the room, his heart shattered, his mind reeling. As he closed the door behind him, the weight of the betrayal settled in fully. There was no going back. There was no fixing this. Sarah's affair had destroyed everything they had, and now all he had left was the hollow ache of a broken heart. Michael stood in the hallway, staring blankly at the floor as the sounds of Sarah's sobs echoed through the house. His world had crumbled, and there was no salvaging the pieces. Michael stood there, frozen, as the hollow sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty house. Something was wrong. And deep down, he knew it was only going to get worse. The days that followed felt like a blur to Michael, a fog of disbelief, anger, and an unrelenting, crushing sadness that weighed on him from the moment he opened his eyes to the second he finally managed to fall asleep, if he even slept at all. Everything felt unreal, like he was trapped in a life that no longer belonged to him. He spent hours just sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the walls, his mind running in circles around the same questions. Why? Why had Sarah done it? Why hadn't he seen it sooner? Why couldn't they have saved what they had? But no answers came, only more questions, more pain, and an ever-deepening sense of loss. The silence in the house was suffocating. Every room felt empty now, like a museum of memories that no longer made sense. He would catch himself walking into the kitchen, expecting to see Sarah there, making breakfast or scrolling through her phone, her usual routine. But she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere. The weight of her absence was unbearable. She tried to talk to him, of course. Sarah wasn't the kind of person to just let things fall apart without a fight. After their confrontation, she spent every day trying to apologize, to explain, to beg him for another chance. But Michael couldn't bring himself to listen. Every word out of her mouth felt like another twist of the knife she had already plunged into his heart. "You've got to eat something," Michael, Sarah said softly one evening, standing in the doorway of the living room as he sat slumped on the couch, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. "You haven't eaten in days." "I'm not hungry," he muttered, staring straight ahead, not even bothering to look at her. "You can't keep going like this," she pressed, her voice breaking slightly as she stepped further into the room. "Please, let me help you." Michael let out a bitter laugh, finally turning his gaze to her. "Help me? You're the one who did this, Sarah. You're the one who tore this apart. How the hell do you expect to help me now?" She flinched, tears filling her eyes again, the same tears she had cried every day since he found out about the affair. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you like this." "Yeah, well, you did." His voice was flat, hollow. He was so tired of hearing her apologies, so tired of the empty words that could never undo the damage. "You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to the way it was." "I know that," she said, wiping at her tears. "I know I can't change what I did. But I love you, Michael. I do. We can fix this. We can try." "Stop it." Michael's voice exploded, startling even himself with the force of his anger. He stood up from the couch, his hands shaking. "Stop saying you love me. You don't do what you did to someone you love. You don't destroy them like this." The room fell into a tense, heavy silence. Sarah stood there, her face crumpled in anguish, but Michael couldn't feel anything but cold, hard resentment. Her words were meaningless now. The trust, the love, it was all gone, replaced by a hollow, gnawing bitterness. He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair as he paced the room. His mind was a mess, a jumbled knot of emotions he couldn't untangle. He felt like he was drowning, suffocating under the weight of everything he had lost. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered, his voice low, defeated. Sarah's breath hitched, and she took a hesitant step toward him. "What do you mean?" I mean, I can't look at you. I can't be in this house with you. Every time I see you, all I see is him. I see the two of you together. I see the lies. I see everything we had, everything just crumbling away." She stood frozen, her face pale, her hands clasped in front of her like she was holding herself together by sheer will. "I'll leave," she said softly. "If that's what you need, I'll go. I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have." Michael let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders sagging. "Maybe you should," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's the only way." Sarah didn't argue. She nodded, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored his own. "I'll pack some things," she said quietly, turning to leave the room. As soon as she was gone, Michael collapsed back onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The weight of her absence was immediate, suffocating in its own right, but it was better than the alternative. He couldn't stand to look at her anymore, to hear her voice, to be reminded of what they had lost. The memories, the good times, were tainted now, poisoned by her betrayal. The days turned into a blur of whiskey and sleepless nights. Michael drank heavily, trying to numb the pain, to forget the images of Sarah with another man. But no matter how much he drank, no matter how much he tried to distract himself, the memories clung to him like a second skin. The image of her kissing that man, the words in those texts, it haunted him. He stopped going to work, stopped answering calls from friends, even from his family. Every attempt they made to reach out felt like a reminder that his life was unraveling, and he couldn't bear to face it. So he shut them all out, retreating into the walls of the house that felt more like a prison with every passing day. One night, after finishing his third glass of whiskey, he found himself in their bedroom. The bed was still made on her side, the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the sheets. His chest tightened with the cruel irony of it all. A month ago, this had been their bed, the place they shared their most intimate moments, their dreams for the future. Now, it felt like a graveyard. Michael sank to the floor, his back against the bed, the weight of it all finally crashing down on him. The whiskey hadn't done its job tonight. He could feel everything, the anger, the heartbreak, the crushing sense of betrayal. Tears welled up in his eyes, and for the first time since that night, he let himself break. He cried deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. It wasn't just the loss of Sarah that tore at him, it was the loss of everything they built together. The dreams they'd shared, the life they'd planned. It was all gone, destroyed by a single act of betrayal. He sat there for what felt like hours, his chest heaving, his mind spinning in 1,000 different directions. He felt so lost, so broken, and he didn't know how to put the pieces of his life back together. And in the midst of the darkness, one thought consumed him. Would he ever be whole again? Days passed. Sarah stayed at a friend's place, texting him once in a while to check in, but Michael didn't respond. He couldn't. He wasn't ready to talk to her. The wound was still too fresh, the pain too raw. He wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to have a real conversation with her again. He avoided the places they used to go together, the restaurants, the parks, even the coffee shop down the street where they used to spend lazy Sunday mornings. Everywhere he went, it felt like Sarah's ghost was there, haunting him with memories of a life that no longer existed. At night, the nightmares came. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, his heart racing, visions of Sarah and the other man burned into his mind. He'd see them together, laughing, touching, kissing, and the pain would hit him all over again. One night he woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. He looked around the empty bedroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He was alone, truly, deeply alone, and the realization hit him like a freight train. This was his life now. This was his reality. Sarah was gone. Their marriage was shattered. And no matter how much he wished he could turn back time, there was no going back. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the darkened window. The silence of the house felt suffocating, pressing in on him from all sides. He wasn't sure how long he could go on like this, living in the ruins of what used to be his life. But as the first light of dawn broke through the window, he knew one thing for sure. He had to find a way to survive. Somehow, some way, he had to keep going, even if it felt impossible. The papers sat on the dining room table, thick and imposing, like the final chapter of a story Michael hadn't wanted to read, the divorce papers. He stared at them for a long time, unable to bring himself to sign. It wasn't because he still loved her, no. That feeling had been torn apart piece by piece. But signing those papers meant admitting defeat, acknowledging that the life he'd built with Sarah was truly over. He'd spent weeks spiraling in the aftermath of her betrayal, drowning in whiskey and sorrow, locking himself away from the world. His friends had all but given up on reaching out, his family no longer called. Sarah had texted a few more times, each message more desperate than the last, but he'd ignored her. What was there to say? What could she possibly say that would fix this? Now, with the divorce looming in front of him, Michael knew there was no avoiding the inevitable. His lawyer had been pushing him for weeks to move forward, to stop delaying what needed to be done. But each time Michael tried to go through with it, something in him resisted. It wasn't that he wanted Sarah back, far from it. It was the finality of it all. Once those papers were signed, there would be no going back, no room for regret, no chance of reconciliation, even if deep down he knew that ship had sailed long ago. He sighed, running a hand through his hair as he reached for the pen. His fingers hovered over the document, shaking slightly. He could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, suffocating him in a way he hadn't expected. This was it. The end. Just as he was about to put the pen to paper, the doorbell rang. Michael froze, the sound echoing through the empty house. He glanced toward the door, his heart sinking. He knew who it was before he even opened it. Sarah. He hadn't seen her in weeks, not since she'd left the house after their explosive argument. But now she stood there on the doorstep, looking smaller, more fragile than he remembered. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for days. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and she was dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, a far cry from the polished image she used to present. Michael, her voice broke as soon as she spoke his name, and for a moment, he felt a pang of something pity, maybe, but not enough to erase the damage she'd done. What do you want, Sarah? His voice was flat, emotionless, as if all the energy had been drained out of him. She hesitated, biting her lip as her eyes darted past him, to the table behind him where the divorce papers sat. As she swallowed, her hands trembling as she wrapped her arms around herself. I don't want this. Michael's jaw clenched, the familiar anger bubbling up inside him. Well, you should have thought about that before you slept with someone else. Her face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse right there on the doorstep, but she steadied herself, her voice trembling. I know I messed up, Michael. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I can't let this end like this. I can't just walk away from us. Michael blinked, his hand tightening on the doorknob. You already did. Sarah shook her head, stepping closer, her eyes pleading. I made a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake, but it doesn't have to end this way. We can fix it. We can go to counseling. We can. Stop. Michael cut her off, his voice cold. Just stop, Sarah. You don't get to come here and beg for forgiveness after everything. You destroyed us. There's no fixing this. Tears streamed down her face now, but Michael felt nothing. Not anymore. He had spent too many nights replaying their life together, agonizing over where things had gone wrong, blaming himself, blaming her, blaming the man she had betrayed him with. But now, standing in front of her, he realized that he didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Sarah's voice broke, her sobs racking her small frame. Please, Michael. Please don't throw everything away. I'll do anything. It's already over, Sarah, he said, cutting through her desperation like a knife. It was over the moment you decided to lie to me. The moment you chose him. Her hands reached for him, but he stepped back, unwilling to let her touch him. The thought of her hands on him, the same hands that had touched another man, made his skin crawl. She flinched at his reaction, pulling her hands back as if she'd been burned. I don't do this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Don't let us end like this. Michael stared at her for a long moment, his heart heavy, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He could see the regret in her eyes, the remorse, the genuine sorrow for what she'd done. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. He stepped aside, motioning to the papers on the table. It's already done. Sarah's gaze flickered to the divorce papers, her face paling as she realized what they meant. Michael, please, sign them, he said, his voice like ice. Sign the papers, Sarah, and then we can both move on. She looked at him, desperation etched into every line of her face, but Michael's expression didn't soften. He was done being the forgiving husband, done being the man who hoped for a miracle. He couldn't forgive her, couldn't forget what she'd done, and no amount of tears or apologies would change that. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for the pen. The silence between them was deafening as she bent over the table and scrawled her signature at the bottom of the page. When she finished, she placed the pen down softly, as if she was afraid to break the fragile quiet between them. Michael didn't say anything. He simply picked up the papers, glanced at her signature, and nodded. It was done. The life they had shared was officially over. Sarah stood there for a moment, as if waiting for him to say something, to give her some indication that this wasn't the end. But Michael stayed silent, his heart a cold, empty shell. Eventually she nodded, wiping her eyes one last time. Goodbye, Michael, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He didn't respond. He couldn't. He watched as she walked out the door, her footsteps fading away as she left his life for good. When the door clicked shut, Michael let out a long, shuddering breath. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier, more final. The papers were signed, the marriage was over, and yet, instead of feeling relief, all Michael felt was a hollow ache deep in his chest. He poured himself another glass of whiskey, sitting back down at the dining room table. The divorce had been inevitable, and now that it was done, he was left with nothing but the empty shell of a life that no longer existed. The process of divorce dragged on, painfully slow and emotionally draining. Sarah fought him at every turn, clinging to what they had, even though there was nothing left to save. She insisted on mediation, on counseling, on finding some way to reconcile, but Michael knew it was over. Every memory of their life together was stained by her infidelity, every moment tainted by the knowledge that she had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. The legal battles were brutal. She fought for assets, for a larger share of their savings, for the house they had once shared. Michael didn't care about the money, but each day in court was another reminder of the life they had built together, and how it had all crumbled into dust. Months passed, and finally the divorce was finalized. The court gave Sarah most of the assets, the house, the savings, even the car. Michael didn't fight it. He had no energy left to argue. He signed the last of the documents, watched as Sarah walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, and walked away with nothing but the weight of his pride and the scars she had left behind. As he stood outside the courthouse, staring up at the gray sky, he realized something. This wasn't just the end of his marriage. It was the end of the man he had been. The man who had believed in love, in trust, in forever. That man was gone. All that remained was a broken shell. And now he had to figure out how to live with that. Michael's footsteps echoed through the dimly lit streets, the city around him humming with the distant buzz of life cars, conversations, laughter from a bar he passed. The sounds felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's world. The cool autumn air bit at his face, but he barely noticed. His mind was somewhere far away, trapped in the ruins of what his life used to be. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. 6 months since he had watched Sarah walk out of the courthouse, her head high, her shoulders back, as if she had emerged victorious. She'd gotten most of the assets more than she deserved, but Michael hadn't cared. Let her take the house, the car, the savings. They were just things. What she'd taken from him could never be replaced. His apartment was small, a far cry from the sprawling suburban home they had shared. It was sparsely furnished, barely more than a bed, a couch, and a table he rarely used. He spent most of his nights alone, either nursing a drink or staring blankly at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the mess his life had become. He wasn't sure how he had managed to survive the last few months. There had been days when getting out of bed felt impossible, when the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on him so hard he could barely breathe. He'd cut off most of his friends, unable to deal with their pity, their well-meaning advice. His family had tried to reach out, but he kept them at arm's length too, unwilling to let anyone see the depths of his despair. Sarah, on the other hand, had moved on quickly. Too quickly. It wasn't long after the divorce that he started hearing whispers from mutual friends about her new relationship. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into confirmation. And soon she was flaunting her new boyfriend, the same man she had cheated with, all over social media. Michael tried not to look, tried not to care. But each time he saw a picture of her, smiling, happy, moving on with her life as if their marriage had been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, the anger flared up again. He hated that she seemed so unaffected by the devastation she had caused, hated that she could rebuild her life so easily while he was still sifting through the ashes of his own. There were moments when he wondered if he would ever feel normal again, if he would ever be able to trust someone, to let someone in without the constant fear of betrayal looming over him. The thought of starting over, of putting himself out there again, felt impossible. His heart had been shattered, and he wasn't sure if it could ever be pieced back together. He reached the edge of the park, the same park where he and Sarah had once taken weekend walks, talking about their future, about the life they were going to build together. It was almost painful to stand there now, in the same spot where they had once been so happy, where they had once believed in forever. But forever was a lie. That was something he had learned the hard way. He shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets, kicking at the gravel beneath his feet as he wandered through the park. The trees were turning, their leaves a riot of red and gold, falling softly to the ground like the remnants of a life he no longer recognized. He thought back to the man he had been before all this, before the affair, before the lies, before the divorce had hollowed him out. He had been hopeful, optimistic, maybe even a little naive. He had believed in love, in commitment, in the idea that two people could build something together that would last a lifetime. But that man was gone. Now, he was just Michael, the man who had been cheated on, the man who had watched his life unravel in the most painful way imaginable. He wasn't sure who he was supposed to be anymore. The identity he had built for himself, the future he had envisioned, had all crumbled in the wake of Sarah's betrayal. And now he was left standing alone, trying to figure out how to rebuild from the wreckage. He sat down on a bench, staring out at the city skyline in the distance, the buildings glowing softly in the night. There was a time when that view had filled him with hope, when he had looked at the future and seen endless possibilities. But now, all he saw was uncertainty. An empty road stretching out before him, with no clear direction, no sense of where he was supposed to go next. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from his friend John, one of the few people who hadn't given up on him, even after months of silence. "Hey man, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Let's grab a drink soon." Michael stared at the message for a long time, his thumb hovering over the reply button. There had been so many times in the last few months when he had ignored texts like this, too consumed by his own misery to respond. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the crisp autumn air, or the quiet of the park, or the fact that he was just so damn tired of being alone. "Sure," he typed back. "Let's do it." He hit send, slipping the phone back into his pocket as he leaned back against the bench. The future still felt uncertain, the road ahead still long and lonely, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. He wasn't sure how long it would take to heal or if he would ever fully trust again, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. The wounds were still fresh, the pain still raw. But there was a glimmer of something else now, something that felt a little bit like hope. Michael stood up, shoving his hands into his pockets as he started walking again. The city stretched out before him, vast and overwhelming. But as he made his way through the streets, he realized that he wasn't completely alone. Maybe he had been broken, but he wasn't destroyed. Not yet. The road ahead was long, and it was going to be hard. But step by step, day by day, he knew he would find his way through the darkness. He didn't know where that road would lead, or what his life would look like in the years to come, but for the first time in months, he felt ready to find out. And maybe that was enough. The night air felt cool against his skin as he walked, his pace steady, his heart a little lighter. The pain would always be there, the scars from Sarah's betrayal etched into his soul, but he wasn't going to let it define him. He wasn't going to stop him from living. As he crossed the street and headed toward the city, the world around him seemed a little less dark, a little less heavy. The wounds were deep, but they would heal. In time, they would heal, and he would survive, no matter how long it took.